This story starts in the heart of Deep Woods Preserve, a battered ranger, a wounded bobcat, and a night of rain, pain, and impossible trust. As dawn breaks, two survivors, one human, one wild, discover what it means to save each other, and how patience can turn fear into an unspoken bond. If you've ever wondered how far kindness can reach, or how the wild teaches us to listen and let go, this one's for you. Drop a comment below, and if you want to support more stories about hope, courage, and the beauty of the wild, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me share even more stories that matter. Let's dive in. You ever notice how the forest is never really silent? Even when it seems still, something's always breathing out there. Wind whispering through pine needles, a jay cackling just out of sight, leaves trembling as a squirrel darts across last year's mulch. But that morning, just as dawn bled pale and cold into Deep Woods Preserve, the quiet was different. It was heavy, thick, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Logan Carter paused at the trail's edge, boots sinking into muddy ground left over from a night of relentless rain. 42 years old, with a jaw like an old shovel and eyes the color of burnt oak, Logan had walked these woods almost every day for 2 decades. He knew the calls of the nighthawks, the paths of the deer, the exact scent of oncoming rain. But this hush, unsettled him. He felt it in his bones, in the hairs rising on the back of his neck, as if something just beyond the tree line was watching. His radio crackled, static, then silence. Even the equipment felt wary. Logan checked the strap of his canvas backpack, adjusted his wide-brimmed hat, and moved off the main trail. The air was sharp with the tang of autumn, wet earth and rotting leaves curling at the base of the massive redwoods. A faint mist clung to the undergrowth, swirling with each careful step. He should have turned back. The warning signs were all there. The deepening mud, the hush, the prickle of dread crawling under his ranger's badge. But something, maybe the memory of last year's lost hiker, or just old habit, pulled him forward. He saw the paw print first, huge, pressed deep into the mud, water pooled inside the impression. Not a mountain lion, different shape, shorter toes, broad pad. He knelt, frowning. Bobcat. But bigger than any he'd seen in years. A branch snapped somewhere to his left, sharp as a gunshot. Logan stiffened, hand unconsciously moving to the pepper spray at his belt. But then, silence again. He pressed on, following the prints as they zigzagged, erratic and desperate, down the slope toward the creek. The stream was swollen, muddy water churning with last night's runoff. And there, just at the bend, half hidden beneath a tangle of fallen branches and muck, he saw it. At first, he thought it was just a clump of debris. But then the shape resolved. Tawny fur caked with mud, a muscled flank rising and falling with each labored breath, the unmistakable curve of a bobcat's ear flattened against its skull. The animal's eyes were open, wide, yellow gold, and wild. It looked at Logan with a mix of exhaustion and warning, a message older than language. Stay back. Logan's pulse kicked up, adrenaline rushing to the surface. An adult bobcat, hurt and cornered, could kill a man. He knew the statistics, rare but not impossible. He also knew what fear looked like in an animal. This wasn't just fear. This was a last stand. He crouched low, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" The bobcat didn't move, but its tail lashed once in the mud, sending a splatter across Logan's boots. He noted the angle of its left foreleg, twisted awkwardly beneath its body, the blood seeping through the fur at the joint. A storm-downed branch lay across the cat's back, pinning it partially in place. He weighed his options. Call for backup? But the radio wouldn't reach through this deep pocket of the woods. Wait for animal control? The bobcat would be dead, either from exposure or from tearing itself further in a panic. Or worse, a scavenger might find it first. Okay, buddy, Logan said quietly, inching forward. His hand slipped inside his pack for the heavy leather gloves he kept for just these sorts of emergencies. He pulled them on, his breath ghosting in the chilly air. Step by slow step, he edged closer. The forest pressed in. His mind replayed every wildlife incident he'd logged over the years. A raccoon bite gone septic, a panicked fawn impaling itself on a broken fence post, a wolf once, years ago, too far gone to help. Each memory hovered like a warning, urging caution. The bobcat growled, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through Logan's chest. He stopped, palms open. I'm not here to hurt you. He doubted the cat understood, but sometimes the sound of a gentle voice mattered more than the words. He scanned the area, looking for anything he could use. His jacket, already soaked, could maybe offer warmth if he needed to cover the cat later. He found a sturdy branch, used it to gently lever the fallen wood from the bobcat's back, all the while watching those sharp eyes for any sign of attack. The branch moved with a wet crack, freeing the animal's torso. The bobcat flinched, teeth bared, but didn't strike. Its breathing hitched, pain flickering across its features. Logan felt a flash of respect. This was a creature that had survived storms, hunger, the relentless jaws of nature itself. Now it was reduced to relying on the mercy of a stranger. The moment stretched. Somewhere behind him, a crow called, startling both man and animal. Logan waited, crouched, letting the bobcat see him, smell him. The cat's gaze never left his face. He'd seen fear before, but he'd never seen trust being built in real time, second by tense second. Finally, Logan spoke again, softer this time. Let me help. His words were swallowed by the mist, but his intent was clear. He set down his pack, slid out a ratty flannel shirt, and edged it toward the bobcat. An offering, a barrier, a promise. He wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, the animal or himself. But as the forest began to breathe again, as the light grew stronger and the silence melted into the quiet chorus of morning, Logan knew this moment would change him forever. He just didn't know how. The rain hadn't let up. It came down in thin, icy sheets, needling through the forest canopy, soaking Logan's jacket and running down his neck. The world was reduced to a blur of mud, water, and the shivering pulse of two lives thrown together by chance. The bobcat, barely more than a shadow, remained half-curled, its side heaving with exhaustion and pain, mud caked thick along its flanks. Logan knelt at the edge of the stream bank, every muscle tensed. The bobcat's eyes followed him with a burning intensity, equal parts suspicion and a strange, flickering hope. Rainwater pooled in the hollows of the land, swirling around Logan's boots, but he barely noticed. All his focus narrowed to the animal in front of him, to the steady tremor of its chest, the uncertain line between fear and desperation in its eyes. He spoke softly, his voice barely a whisper beneath the patter of rain. Easy now, big girl. I'm not here to hurt you. I promise. The bobcat's only answer was a thin growl, sharp and uncertain. Logan's hands, steady from years of work in the woods, but now tingling with nerves, began to dig away the heavy mud from around the trapped paw. Every motion was slow, deliberate, like he was working with live dynamite. The mud sucked at his gloves, thick and cold. But Logan kept going, pausing each time the cat tensed or bared her teeth. In these tight moments, time seemed to stretch out, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. He felt the raw power that coiled in those muscles. Even wounded, a bobcat could lash out faster than a snake, jaws strong enough to crush bone. He'd seen the aftermath of wildcat attacks before. He had no illusions about what could happen if he made the wrong move. A branch snapped somewhere deeper in the woods. A deer, maybe, or just the wind. Logan didn't look up. The world beyond this fragile circle of mud and pain didn't matter now. He dug with his fingers, feeling the sticky chill creep into his bones. Rain dripped from his hat brim, trickled under his collar, made his teeth clench. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The world seemed suspended. The bobcat never took her gaze off him, those wild golden eyes following his every twitch. Once, her lip curled, baring ivory teeth, and Logan froze, breath caught in his throat. But she didn't strike. Maybe she was too weak, or maybe somewhere beneath the wild she understood. As he worked, Logan found himself talking, a habit he'd picked up over years of lonely patrols. "You know, you're not the first wild thing I've helped. Got a red fox out of a snare last winter. Saved a hawk with a busted wing, too. But you," he smiled, nerves sparking, "you're in a league of your own, aren't you?" His hands finally touched fur, sodden and slick with rain. He gently freed the paw, wincing as the bobcat flinched, but she didn't claw or snap. Mud fell away in clumps, revealing a deep gash, probably from a rock or broken branch. Blood welled up, vivid against the brown. Logan pressed his flannel shirt against the wound, murmuring, "I know, it hurts. I'm sorry. Just a little more." He risked a glance at the animal's face. The bobcat's eyes were wide, her breath shallow, but she didn't try to bolt. She looked resigned. Maybe the storm, the pain, the exhaustion had broken her fight. Or maybe in some deep, unknowable way, she was placing her trust in the stranger beside her. The rain intensified, drumming on the leaves and turning the world into a blurry watercolor. Logan shrugged off his jacket despite the chill and draped it gently over the cat's back. She stiffened, every muscle tense, but didn't move away. "That's it," he murmured, his voice half prayer, half command. "Stay with me. Just a little longer." A gust of wind whipped through the trees, sending a flock of crows cawing into the sky. Logan's radio, forgotten at his hip, crackled with distant static, but he ignored it. There was no one coming. Not in this weather, not this deep in the preserve. He sat with the bobcat as the rain poured down, the two of them locked in a strange, desperate communion. For the first time, Logan felt the full weight of responsibility. Out here, far from help, he was all this animal had, and maybe, he admitted with a quiet shiver, she was all he had too. Time crawled. Logan shifted, flexing numb fingers. The bobcat's breathing was ragged but steady. When she shuddered, he moved closer, creating a small shield from the wind with his body. The cold gnawed at him, but he barely noticed. He found himself watching the rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyes never quite closed, as if she was teetering on the edge of fight or flight. A memory rose, sharp and unbidden. His father's voice, long ago, teaching him to respect every creature's fear. "They don't know your heart, son. All they see is a giant with hands. You want their trust? Earn it, second by second." He thought of that now as he sat, soaked and shivering, beside a wild thing that could kill him with a swipe. He could leave. He should leave. But he stayed, because to do anything else felt like a betrayal, not just to the bobcat, but to the forest itself. As twilight thickened and the rain eased, Logan realized he was muttering encouragements. "We'll get through this. You're tough, I can tell. Just hold on, okay?" The bobcat's eyes flickered, half closing, then snapping open again. A muscle twitched in her leg. She was fighting, too. At some point, Logan found himself clutching her paw, half for her comfort, half for his own. It was absurd. A man and a wildcat, united by mud, blood, and the stubborn refusal to let go. But in that moment, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape, became something quieter, less urgent. The line between danger and trust was as thin as the line between rain and mist. Blurred, changing, alive. Night was falling fast, shadows stretching between the trees. Logan knew he couldn't move the bobcat now, not without hurting her, not without risking both their lives in the dark. He'd have to stay, make a camp, hope that by morning, the trust they'd forged would be enough. He squeezed the bobcat's paw gently, feeling a pulse flutter beneath his fingers. "Hang in there, girl," he whispered. "We're in this together now." The forest settled, rain tapering to a hush. For the first time all day, Logan felt a strange warmth, a sense that, against all odds, maybe, just maybe, the wild was willing to meet him halfway. The forest at night had its own kind of darkness. Not just the absence of light, but something thicker, primeval, almost alive, seeping into every hollow, swallowing the world in shades of midnight blue and shadowed gray. By the time the sun vanished behind the tangled ridgeline, Logan had scraped together a makeshift camp just above the stream bed, his hands raw and muddy, his whole body aching with cold and worry. He glanced over at the bobcat, barely visible now except for the ghostly gleam of her eyes and the way her sides moved in shallow, measured breaths. She hadn't tried to move. Not really. Logan guessed that pain and exhaustion had forced her to accept his presence, if not to trust it. Even so, every small shift of his weight, every snap of a twig, sent a ripple of tension through her body. She was alive in every nerve, always ready to fight or bolt, even as her strength ebbed. Logan knew better than to crowd her. He'd built the fire a careful distance away, close enough for warmth, but far enough to offer her an escape route if she needed it. The flames sputtered in the damp air, giving off more smoke than heat. Logan hunched beside the meager blaze, rolling his shoulders to drive out the chill, and watched the sky bleed to black. He took off his gloves, held his hands over the fire until they stung. Night pressed in from all sides, an endless cathedral of whispering leaves, distant animal calls, and the slow drumbeat of the creek. Occasionally, a gust of wind would swirl the mist, and Logan would hear branches crack in the deeper dark. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted, lonely and searching. He reached into his backpack, dug out a battered water bottle, and poured a little into the metal cap. He slid it across the ground toward the bobcat, careful not to make any sudden moves. For a long time, she ignored it. Her ears flicked toward him, then back to the woods. Only when the forest was completely still did she stretch out her neck, tongue flicking to lap at the water. 1, 2, 3 times. Then she retreated, eyes never leaving him. Logan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something. A first crack in the wall between wild and human. He fished a strip of jerky from his pocket, tore it in half, and tossed a piece toward her. It landed in the grass, a little closer than he'd intended. The bobcat's nostrils flared, but she didn't move. Logan shrugged, chewing his own piece slowly, the tough saltiness grounding him in the present. The hours crawled by. The cold sank deeper, gnawing at his bones. Logan wrapped himself in his damp flannel shirt, knees drawn up to his chest. He forced himself to stay alert, listening for the telltale signs of danger, coyotes perhaps, or a wandering bear. The fire crackled and spat, a fragile barrier against the night. At times, Logan's mind wandered. He remembered other long nights, campouts with his older brother when they were kids, their voices soft and conspiratorial beneath the tent. He remembered the night he'd gotten the call that his father was gone, the world suddenly emptier and harder to bear. Out here, under the vast black sky, all those memories returned, sharp and bittersweet. He glanced at the bobcat, huddled against a log, her fur matted and slick. She was fighting her own battle, one he could barely imagine. The wild didn't give second chances. Out here, you survived or you didn't. No exceptions, no explanations. Logan wondered if she'd lost a mate, a cub, something that had made her reckless enough to get caught in the storm. He wished he could ask, wished there was some way to bridge the gulf between them. But words wouldn't help here, only actions. Every hour or so, he'd offer her another sip of water or another tiny piece of jerky. Sometimes she accepted, sometimes she ignored him entirely. Once, when the wind shifted, she bared her teeth, a soundless warning that made Logan freeze in place. He respected it. She was still wild, after all. That wildness was what made her beautiful and dangerous. The rain returned around midnight, softer now but persistent. Logan adjusted the tarp over his head, then tucked another log onto the fire. The flame sputtered, but held. He wrapped his arms tighter around his knees, shivering in the damp air. He found himself talking again, not really to the bobcat, but to the darkness itself. "You ever feel alone out here?" he murmured. "Feels like the world just keeps spinning, no matter what happens. No one to notice if you vanish." He glanced over at her, but she gave no sign she was listening. He watched her eyes, bright and restless in the dark. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. A threat, a curiosity, a possible savior. Or maybe just another animal trying to make it through the night. They weren't so different, he thought. Both fighting for survival, both wary of what tomorrow might bring. Around 3 a.m, Logan heard movement in the underbrush. A quick, scuttling sound. He stiffened, hand reaching for the flashlight at his belt. The bobcat's head came up, ears pricked, body tense. Logan waited, breath held, as the sound faded. Probably just a possum or a raccoon drawn by the scent of food. Still, his heart hammered in his chest. Time lost all meaning. The world shrank to the circle of firelight, the steady hush of rain, the shared isolation of man and beast. Every now and then, Logan caught the bobcat watching him, her gaze cool and unblinking. He tried not to stare back. Instead, he let his actions speak for him, keeping his distance, sharing warmth, giving what comfort he could. Dawn was a long time coming. The first hint of gray crept over the horizon, seeping into the blackness, slowly teasing shapes and colors out of the shadows. Logan felt every second, every ache in his body, every shiver. He was exhausted, half frozen but alive, and so was the bobcat. He looked at her then, truly looked. There was still fear in her eyes, but something else too, a flicker of recognition, maybe even gratitude. They'd survived the night together. In the quiet that followed, Logan felt a strange kinship, as if the wilderness itself had accepted him, just for a moment. He reached for his water bottle, poured out another capful, and slid it toward her with a smile. "Morning," he whispered, voice cracked and tired. "We made it." The bobcat watched him for a long time. Then, as the first golden rays of sunlight slipped through the trees, she shifted, just a little, closer to the fire. And for the first time, Logan dared to hope. Dawn seeped slowly into Deep Woods Preserve, not with a fanfare of color, but in a careful misty wash, pale light sifting through the trees and settling over the battered ground like a sigh of relief. Logan's fire had burned low, barely embers now, but the night's tension had faded with the darkness, replaced by an uneasy quiet. He felt the ache in his back, the stiffness in his legs, and the rawness in his throat from a night spent shivering and whispering encouragements to the wild. He wiped the sleep from his eyes, blinking at the strange scene in front of him. The bobcat had survived. That much was obvious. She was still there, her coat a wild tapestry of dried mud and tangled fur, but her posture had changed. No longer pressed against the earth in tight, frightened submission, she lay curled but watchful, her gaze wary yet less panicked, her breath coming easier in the morning air. Logan glanced at her paw, remembering the struggle in the mud and the way she'd allowed him, just barely, to clean and dress the wound with a torn strip of his own flannel. The bleeding had slowed, though he could see the pain etched in her every movement. He wondered how long she'd been fighting before he'd stumbled on her, how close she'd come to just giving up. "Good morning, girl," he said softly, voice barely louder than the wind slipping through the trees. He kept his distance, careful not to invade the fragile bubble of space she seemed to require. Instead, he busied himself with the fire, coaxing a few thin flames back to life, adding sticks until the smoke turned blue and fragrant. When he finally dared look back at her, she was watching, head lifted, ears pricked forward. Logan grinned a little. He rummaged in his pack and pulled out another piece of jerky, tossing it gently so it landed a few feet from her nose. She flinched, shrinking away at first, then slowly inched forward, sniffing at the offering. Her hunger overpowered her suspicion, and she snapped up the meat with a swift, almost shy motion. He let out a slow, careful breath. This was the start of something. Not trust, not really, but maybe the barest hint of it. A fragile thread strung between two survivors. He remembered his dad's advice again, from a childhood full of camping trips and long, patient days of birdwatching. The wild'll tell you what it needs, if you just hush and listen. The sun crept higher, slanting through the trees, catching on every drop of water and making the world shimmer. Logan found himself mesmerized by the way the bobcat's eyes reflected that gold, deep and unblinking. They studied each other, a long and careful stare. She shifted, dragging her injured paw under her chest, her body trembling with the effort. But she didn't snarl. She didn't flee. The silence grew comfortable. Logan stirred the fire, poured himself a cup of weak coffee from his battered thermos, and sipped, savoring the warmth and the tiny sense of normalcy it provided. Occasionally, he'd murmur a word or two. Nothing important, just the gentle sound of his voice in the quiet. He hoped she found it reassuring. A jay landed in the branches above, chattering, then flitted away. The bobcat's ears twitched, but she didn't try to chase it. Instead, she watched Logan, every muscle taut but less afraid. He could see the shift, a new wariness replacing panic, an uncertain calculation. Was he a threat or a source of help? Could she risk coming closer? After a while, Logan tried again. He unwrapped a red apple from his pack, rolling it in his hands. He set it at the edge of the camp, far enough that she'd have to make the decision to approach, close enough that she'd know it was for her. She sniffed the air, unsure. Eventually, she ignored it, turning her attention back to the fire. He respected that. Trust couldn't be rushed, especially not in the wild. He made no move to touch her, no attempt to force the issue. Instead, he let the day stretch around them, sharing the small warmth of the fire, each in their own sphere of quiet. Every so often, the bobcat shifted. Sometimes her paw twitched, a ripple of pain passing through her, and Logan would tense, ready to intervene if she tried to stand too soon. But she didn't. She lay still, her breathing evening out, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion and, he hoped, a measure of peace. Mid-morning came and went. Logan busied himself with small camp chores, refilling his canteen, mending a tear in his jacket, sketching the shape of the land in a notebook he kept for ranger reports. He kept an eye on her always, but gave her space to rest. It was almost noon when he felt it, the first real change. The bobcat, restless from hours of lying still, inched forward, dragging her body across the leaves until she was a foot closer to the warmth. She paused, looking at Logan as if weighing the consequences, then settled again, this time her tail just brushing the edge of the firelight. Logan smiled, holding back the urge to celebrate. Instead, he reached for another piece of jerky, this one smaller, and placed it gently on the ground between them. He sat back, hands open, letting her make the next move. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the distant call of a hawk overhead. Then, slowly, the bobcat crept forward, favoring her wounded leg. She paused, looked at him, then picked up the food. She didn't eat it right away. Instead, she sat there, close enough that Logan could see the tiny flecks of mud on her whiskers, the pink scar where an old injury had long since healed. They stayed like that for a while, two creatures sharing space, sharing breath, neither entirely trusting but no longer afraid. The wildness hadn't left her eyes, Logan knew it never would, but something else had joined it now. A quiet curiosity, a willingness to accept his presence, at least for today. As the afternoon sun painted golden patterns across the forest floor, Logan felt the beginnings of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this fragile alliance would last. Maybe together, they could weather whatever the woods decided to throw their way. For now, he was content to simply sit and watch the bobcat, the fire between them a silent promise of peace. In the weeks that followed that storm-soaked morning, the world of Deep Woods Preserve changed in ways both small and profound. Logan Carter's patrols grew longer, his eyes sharper, his heart tuned not just to the needs of the land, but to the silent presence he'd come to anticipate just beyond the edge of sight. The bobcat had become a ghostly shadow in his life, never seen up close, but never entirely absent either. Every dawn, as the mist pooled in the hollows and the sun smeared gold across the treetops, Logan made the same quiet pilgrimage. He'd pocket a crisp red apple from the ranger station kitchen, sometimes two just in case, and head for the same clearing where he and the bobcat had last shared a fire. The ground was soft and black from so many rains, the bracken heavy with dew. He'd walk slow, his boots careful not to snap any twigs, his breath fogging in the cold air. At the edge of the woods, always in the same spot, he'd set the apple down on a flat stone. At first it felt almost silly, offering fruit to a wild predator. but something about the ritual felt right. It was a sign, a silent message. I was here. I remember you. I'm not your enemy. He never waited around to see if the bobcat would appear. Instead, he'd walk the boundary trails, check for signs of poachers or hikers in trouble, clear brush from overgrown paths. He tried not to think too much about the apple or what might happen to it. Yet every afternoon, when he doubled back on his way home, the fruit was always gone. Sometimes it was as if it had vanished without a trace. Other times, he'd find the tiniest scraps of skin or a neat row of claw marks in the mud beside the stone. Once, a set of paw prints, bigger than he remembered, crisp and clear in the wet earth, led away from the apple's resting place and disappeared into the thick underbrush. Logan crouched to examine them, feeling a strange mixture of pride and longing. It was proof. She was still out there. She was surviving. The routine grew, day by day, into something sacred. Each apple left behind felt like a note in a secret language. Logan started to notice other signs, too. Feathers scattered near a stream bank, evidence of a successful hunt. The occasional flash of tawny fur among the trees when the morning was especially quiet. More than once, he'd catch a flicker of movement on a distant ridge, golden eyes glinting before they slipped away. At times it drove him half mad with curiosity. He wanted to see her up close, to know if the paw had healed, if her limp had lessened, if she'd managed to put back the weight she'd lost. But he knew better than to push his luck. The forest had its own rhythm, and trust was something that grew, or died, in silence. Still, there were mornings that hummed with possibility. One especially foggy day, Logan arrived to find the apple still resting on the stone. He stopped in his tracks. On a hunch, and he turned slowly, scanning the tree line. For a moment, all was quiet. Then, there. Deep among the shadowed branches, a pair of ears, a wedge-shaped head, eyes watching him with the same unblinking patience he'd seen on that first day. Logan didn't move, didn't even breathe. He let his gaze soften, looked away first, a small show of respect. When he looked back, the bobcat had vanished, melting into the green and gold tapestry of the woods. He felt an odd warmth settle in his chest, a quiet thrill. She had let him see her. It was an invitation, not to approach, but to continue the ritual, to keep faith with the wordless agreement they'd struck. He began to talk to her during his rounds, just in case she was listening. "You're getting clever, aren't you?" he'd say, brushing dew from the stone. Or, "Saw your tracks by the old logging road. Hope you're not hunting too close to the coyote den." Sometimes he'd share fragments of his day, complaints about the paperwork piling up back at the station, or funny stories about the young rangers in training who never listened. It helped fill the silence and made the forest feel less lonely. Spring gave way to early summer. The woods erupted with life. Ferns unrolling, songbirds staking out new territories, blackberries forming in tangled brambles. Logan noticed a change in the air, a lightness that hadn't been there before. He started to see more signs, a crushed patch of grass where something had bedded down, tufts of shed fur on a thorn bush, the faintest hint of musk on a still morning. It felt like the bobcat had woven herself into the fabric of the land and into Logan's own routine. Then came the day when everything shifted. Logan, returning from a long patrol, caught sight of her. Not a glimpse, not a shadow, but a full, clear view. She stood atop a fallen log, tail curled, coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight. Her eyes met his, steady and calm. There was a fresh scar on her flank, but her step was sure, her muscles sleek beneath the fur. For a moment, time hung suspended. The bobcat stared at him, then, very deliberately, sat down, as if to show she had nothing to fear. Logan felt his heart leap in his chest. He didn't speak, didn't dare. He simply nodded, acknowledging her presence. Then, with a single, graceful motion, she slipped away into the shadows, gone as quickly as she'd appeared. After that, their ritual deepened. The apple became a symbol, yes, but so did every silent meeting, every shared morning. Logan realized he was no longer alone in the woods. There was a presence, a watchful, wild companion, moving beside him, just out of sight. He carried that sense of connection back to the station, into every part of his life. When the younger rangers asked him why he walked the same trail each morning, he'd just shrug and say, "Habit, I guess." But in his heart, he knew it was more. It was about faith, about trust, about the thrill of being noticed by the wild, even if only for a moment. The forest had changed, and so had he. The bobcat had become a thread woven through his days, a constant reminder that the wild notices, remembers, and sometimes, even if only in the smallest ways, reaches back. The forest always felt different at dusk. Shadows grew long and blue between the trees, and every sound, every snap of twig, every distant yip, took on a sharper edge. That spring evening, Logan Carter moved carefully through the thicket, the hush broken only by the distant trill of crickets and the steady crunch of his boots in the undergrowth. He was far from the ranger station, deeper into the backcountry than he'd planned, chasing a set of fresh tire tracks that cut like scars through a protected patch of wildflowers. Logan crouched low, brushing his fingers over the crushed petals. Poachers, maybe, or some fool with a four-wheeler who thought rules didn't apply after dark. Either way, it made his blood simmer. He marked the spot on his notepad, snapped a photo with his phone, and started down the ridge to pick up the trail. That's when he heard it. A low, rolling growl, too deep for a coyote, too close for comfort. Logan straightened, scanning the shadows. His hand went to the pepper spray on his belt. He knew the signs. Nighttime was predator time, and anything wounded or slow might as well be wearing a neon sign. He listened, heart pounding, every sense straining for the next clue. The woods erupted in sudden chaos. A chorus of snarls echoed through the trees, followed by the frantic scuffle of paws on wet leaves. Logan's flashlight flicked across a flash of gray fur. Coyotes, a whole pack, moving with the coordinated hunger of animals that knew how to hunt together. He caught the glint of yellow eyes in the brush, felt their gaze crawl over him like ice water. He backed up, careful not to run. Running meant prey. He'd taught new rangers that for years. Stand your ground, make yourself look bigger, don't show fear. But out here, alone and far from help, the lessons felt thin as smoke. Then it happened. His foot slid on the mossy earth, and suddenly he was falling, tumbling down the muddy ravine. Rocks bit at his arms, thorns tore at his sleeves, and by the time he came to a stop at the bottom, he was half blinded by sweat and mud. Pain flared up his leg, a twisted ankle, maybe worse. Logan gritted his teeth, tried to stand, and nearly collapsed as the ground spun beneath him. Above, the coyotes gathered at the rim, emboldened by his fall. Their leader, a rangy brute with a torn ear, stepped forward, lips peeled back in a snarl. Logan fumbled for his radio, but the static was hopeless. He tried to shout, hoping to scare them off, but the words stuck in his throat. One coyote crept closer, then another. They formed a half circle, eyes locked on Logan, hungry and unblinking. He swung a stick, yelling, but they only flinched, growing bolder with every heartbeat. The pack was desperate. He could see it in their ribs, their ragged coats, the way they snapped at each other for position. Logan's mind raced. He'd faced danger before, but not like this. Not pinned, hurt, and alone. He dug deep, summoning every ounce of calm he had, and tried to think. If he could just get upright, just find a way to climb, maybe. A snarl behind him. Logan spun, expecting another coyote, but what he saw stole his breath. The bobcat. She stood at the edge of the clearing, tail low, her golden eyes blazing. Her body was lean, healed but marked by fresh scars, and there was a terrible beauty in her wildness, a coiled energy, quiet and absolute. She made no sound, not at first. She just stared at the coyotes, her gaze challenging, the forest holding its breath. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the bobcat moved, swift as lightning, breaking the spell. She leapt from the shadows, muscles bunching, claws flashing as she barreled into the led coyote. The pack scattered, yelping in surprise and terror. Logan could only watch, stunned, as she drove them back with a ferocity he'd never seen in the wild before. The bobcat didn't chase far, just enough to break their courage. She stood between Logan and the coyotes, her body low, fangs bared, every hair raised in defiance. The coyotes regrouped at the edge of the clearing, snapping and whining, but their confidence was broken. One by one, they melted away into the darkness, their eyes still burning with frustrated hunger. When it was over, the bobcat turned, her chest heaving, sides streaked with mud and sweat. Logan tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. You saved me." She limped closer, not in fear, not in anger, but with the solemn purpose of an old friend. She settled beside him, just out of arm's reach, and sat facing the woods, guarding against the return of the pack. For a while, neither of them moved. Logan let the adrenaline fade, taking stock of his injuries. His leg throbbed with every pulse. His palms were scraped raw, and he felt the dull ache of bruises blooming all along his back. But the worst of it, fear, had receded, replaced by a deep, humbling awe. He looked at the bobcat, her fur bristling, her breath ragged. She was wounded too, one ear torn, fresh blood tracing a line down her cheek. Yet there was a pride in her posture, a wild, undeniable dignity that made Logan want to bow his head in respect. "Thank you," he said softly, words nearly lost in the hush that followed. He meant it, more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. Out here, under the bruised sky, with night coming on fast, they were just two survivors, each battered by the world, each having chosen, for reasons neither could explain, to stand together. The bobcat blinked, slow and regal, then turned back to the woods. Logan understood. The bond between them was absolute now, sealed in blood and courage and the silent language of wild things. As dusk thickened into night, the forest seemed to relax around them, the danger gone for now. Logan let his head fall back against the mossy earth, listening to the sound of the bobcat's breath, feeling the heat of her body close by. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly safe. The forest had a different kind of hush after danger passed, a hush that was deeper, more tender, as if every living thing paused to breathe in relief. Night pressed close, cool and fragrant with earth and pine, while above, the first faint stars blinked to life in the thinning clouds. Down in the hollow, Logan and the bobcat sat together by the creek, exhaustion settling into their bones. Logan tested his leg, wincing at the sharp, insistent pain in his ankle. He rolled up his jeans, probing gently until he was sure nothing was broken, only badly twisted. He flexed his toes, grateful for the rush of blood and the steady throb that meant he'd walk out of here, even if it took all night. The bobcat had moved little since driving off the coyotes. She sat a few feet away, her body tense but no longer bristling with aggression, her sides still shuddering with every breath. Blood matted her fur along one flank and behind a tattered ear. But she licked her wounds with the stoic focus of a creature for whom pain was an old companion. They did not look at each other, not at first. Instead, each nursed their hurts in the way of their own kind. Logan tearing strips from the tail of his shirt to make a rough bandage, the bobcat tongue cleaning her ragged skin, pausing now and then to lift her head and scan the tree line for any threat. But something had shifted. Their wariness was gone, replaced by an understanding that ran deeper than words, born of shared peril and the simple fact that they had chosen, in that crucial moment, not to leave each other alone. When the worst of the pain dulled, Logan built a small fire, careful to shield the flames with stones so the light wouldn't carry too far. He felt a quiet satisfaction at the task, every spark and hiss a reassurance that he could still take care of himself, even battered and lost in the woods. He filled his old metal mug with creek water, boiled it, and added a pinch of instant coffee from the foil packet in his jacket. The taste was thin, but it warmed him from the inside out. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "You ever get tired of fighting, girl?" The question drifted out, not really expecting an answer. The bobcat glanced his way, eyes catching the firelight, then returned to her careful grooming. Logan watched her, marveling at the blend of wildness and grace. He'd always respected the creatures of the forest, but tonight that respect felt personal, an intimate thread, strong and invisible, tying their lives together. A few feet away, the bobcat finally settled. She curled, belly tucked, tail wrapped around her paws. For the first time, she closed her eyes in Logan's presence. He recognized the gift of that moment, the ultimate sign of trust from a wild animal, the willingness to surrender to sleep near another living soul. Logan shifted closer, just enough to feel the comfort of proximity, but not enough to break the fragile peace. He checked his bandage, prodded his ribs, and found bruises, but nothing serious. The air grew colder as the fire burned low, and he wrapped his jacket around his shoulders, leaning back to watch the stars emerge, one by one, in the dark tapestry overhead. For a long time, the only sounds were the crackling fire, the soft lap of water against stone, and the gentle, rhythmic breath of the bobcat at rest. Logan let the silence fill him. He thought of all the words that might be spoken, thanks, comfort, apology, awe, but realized none of them would have meant as much as this quiet. He remembered something his mother used to say. Some of the strongest bonds aren't spoken, they're lived. He smiled at the memory, watching the bobcat's side rise and fall, the peace of her sleep a balm against the night's earlier violence. Eventually, he stretched out on the soft moss, one arm curled beneath his head. He let his mind drift, exhaustion finally pulling him down. Before he slipped into sleep, he caught a final glimpse of the bobcat, her ears twitching in her dreams, her body finally relaxed, unafraid. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, Logan woke to the sound of movement, a quick, furtive rustle. He tensed, but the bobcat lifted her head, ears pricked, then let out a low, rumbling purr. The sound surprised Logan. It was raw, wild, not the gentle rumble of a house cat, but something deeper, older. She was talking in her own way, telling him that she was there, that the danger had passed for now. He whispered, "It's okay. I'm still here." He didn't know if she understood the words, but she seemed to accept the sentiment, laying her head back down and closing her eyes once more. Dawn crept in slowly, the air growing lighter, the chill easing. Logan woke stiff and sore but alive, and for a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the bobcat, still sleeping, her wounds scabbed over, her body steady and whole. He smiled, feeling a fierce pride for both of them. He rose quietly, tending the fire and checking his supplies. As the sun climbed higher, the bobcat stood, stretched, and limped to the water's edge to drink. Logan followed, careful not to crowd her. He washed his hands and face, letting the cold water clear away the last traces of fear and pain. They stood together in the soft morning light, side by side. No words, no gestures. Only the quiet miracle of survival, of wounds that would heal, of a bond that could not be measured but only lived. The language of silence, spoken by the wild and those who dared to listen. There's a quiet magic to the end of a long day in the woods, a hush that settles over the ranger station as the sun drops behind the distant hills, turning the sky the color of embers and honey. The air is cooler now, scented with pine sap and the last hint of wood smoke, and the shadows grow long across the clearing. Logan Carter sat by the campfire, his battered mug of coffee warming his hands, surrounded by a ring of new recruits whose faces glowed in the flickering light. They were all young, most of them barely out of college, all of them eager, nervous, and still a little in awe of the wild places they'd signed up to protect. Logan recognized himself in their wide eyes and restless energy. He'd once been that hungry for adventure, that sure the woods would always answer to logic and courage. But years of storms, lost hikers, and quiet miracles had changed him. Now, he waited for questions to come, letting the fire speak for a while. One of the recruits, a wiry young man with freckles and a stubborn jaw, broke the silence. "Logan, you ever really been scared out here? Like for your life?" The group leaned in, hungry for a story. Logan smiled, taking a slow sip before answering. "Scared? Yeah, more times than I can count. The woods will do that to you sooner or later. They'll remind you just how small you are." He paused, letting the fire pop and settle. "But the time that stays with me most wasn't about fear. It was about trust, and how damn hard it is to earn it, out here or anywhere." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and told them about the storm, the muddy creek bed, and the wild eyes he'd met on a morning when the whole world seemed to be holding its breath. He told it simply, without drama, just the facts. The mud, the wound, the hesitation. He described the nights spent by a flickering fire, the mornings when hope was as thin as the mist on the river. He spoke about the silence, about learning to wait, to listen, to offer help and step back again and again, no matter how much his hands itched to do more. The recruits listened, spellbound. No one interrupted. Logan could see their eyes tracking the story, picturing themselves in his place, feeling the uncertainty, the cold, the weight of responsibility. "What happened next?" a young woman asked, voice hushed. Logan smiled, remembering. "She let me get close, little by little. Not because I wanted it, because I waited, because I made it her choice." He looked at the circle, searching for understanding. That's the lesson the wild teaches best. You can't force trust. Not from an animal, not from a person. You show up, you do the right thing, and sometimes, if you're patient, if you're lucky, The wild meets you halfway. Someone asked if he ever tried to bring the bobcat in, to call animal control or keep her safe. Logan shook his head. She wasn't mine to save. I helped her because she needed it, and then I let her go. That's the part that's hardest to explain. Sometimes kindness is just doing what needs to be done, then letting the wild be wild. The best bonds aren't about ownership. They're about recognition. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced across the young faces. Logan looked at each of them, hoping the lesson would stick. Nature rewards you sometimes, not always the way you expect. Sometimes it's a close call that makes you wiser. Sometimes it's a look, a moment when you know you've been seen by something that owes you nothing. Those are the moments you carry. He told them about the apple ritual, how he'd left fruit for months, never knowing if the bobcat would return. He described the thrill of finding paw prints in the mud, the days when he caught a glimpse of gold eyes among the trees. We weren't friends, he said. Not the way people think, but we were something, and that something changed me. A recruit spoke up, hesitant. Do you think she remembers you? Even now? Logan stared into the fire, the memory vivid and bittersweet. I hope so, but that's not really the point. What matters is that I remember her, and what she taught me. That patience is its own kind of courage, that sometimes you do everything right, and the wild still walks away. But if you're lucky, if you're worthy, it comes back in its own time. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling fire. Logan took another sip, letting the silence linger. He felt the weight of his years in the woods. Every sunrise, every injury, every narrow escape and quiet triumph. He felt humbled, not by his own actions, but by the stubborn, sacred resilience of the wild itself. He leaned back, stretching his sore leg, and smiled at the recruits. You all think you're here to protect the land. You are. But the land, if you let it, will change you too. It'll make you slower, quieter, more careful. It'll teach you to wait, and sometimes it'll let you witness a miracle. He poked at the fire, watching sparks float up into the night. So be patient. Don't come out here thinking you'll tame anything. Earn your place, and if the wild notices, count yourself lucky. The recruits nodded, the lesson hanging in the cool night air. Logan looked up at the stars, feeling a deep, abiding peace. He thought of the bobcat, fierce and unbroken, somewhere out there in the shadows. He hoped she was well, that she was still wild, still free. For Logan, that was enough. A story, a lesson, and the quiet hope that the next generation would learn what he had. That the truest connections are built on patience, humility, and a respect for all things wild. Dusk in Deep Woods Preserve was a masterclass in subtlety. As Logan walked the forest edge, each breath seemed thicker with memory and meaning. The western sky was streaked with violet and orange, fading to indigo where the tallest redwoods cast their endless shadows. Logan's boots, caked with old mud, barely disturbed the hush. The land felt both infinite and intimate, a place where every stone, every whisper of wind seemed to hold its own secret. He'd gotten into the habit of taking these evening walks, especially after sharing his story with the new recruits. There was something meditative about watching the light die and the world turn inward for the night. He moved slowly, letting his senses stretch, noting the details he might have once ignored. A woodpecker hammering out the last call of daylight, the flutter of a moth's wings in a shaft of gold, the soft, resigned snap of twigs underfoot. He thought, too, of the bobcat. Sometimes he still expected to find her waiting on the trail, or to see those golden eyes reflecting back from the shadows. More often, though, it was just the memory that traveled with him, a quiet reassurance, equal parts pain and pride. On this particular evening, Logan's mind wandered back over the long arc of the last few months. He recalled that first morning by the stream, the cold terror and fragile hope, the nights huddled around a smoky fire, the ritual of apples and silent companionship. He remembered the charge of adrenaline when the coyotes closed in, and the way the bobcat had appeared, fierce, battered, wild, a living miracle. He paused, leaning against a mossy log, his breath curling in the cooling air. All around him, the forest seemed to breathe too, settling into the rhythms of night. Somewhere nearby, a fox barked, brief and bright as a spark. Logan smiled, letting the sound wash over him. A movement caught his eye, a ripple in the brush just beyond the edge of a sunken trail. Logan went still, body tensed with old instincts. The shadows parted, and there she was, the bobcat. She was leaner now, all sinew and silent strength, her coat glossy in the last light. She moved with the effortless confidence of a creature who belonged utterly to the land. There was no limp in her step, no trace of old wounds, though Logan could still see the faint scars that mapped her survival. For a moment, she stood framed by ferns, the tip of her tail flicking with a question. They held each other's gaze across the hush, neither moving, neither needing words. Logan felt his heart drum once, hard, a mix of pride, joy, and a sharp, familiar ache. He wanted to step forward, to speak, to thank her for everything she'd been, everything she'd taught him, but the lesson of the wild was clear. Some distances must be respected, some bonds honored from afar. The bobcat took a step, then paused. She glanced back at Logan, just once, just long enough for him to feel truly seen. Then, with a grace that made her seem almost unreal, she melted into the undergrowth, the shadows swallowing her up. Logan watched until the last hint of her tail disappeared, his breath caught in his throat. He stood there a long while, letting the moment settle into his bones. The world around him seemed unchanged. The same soft dusk, the same gentle wind through the trees, but something inside him felt quietly transformed. He had not tamed the wild. He had not won anything, or conquered, or even rescued. Instead, he had learned what it meant to share the woods, to be a guest, to accept the gifts of trust and solitude, to understand that sometimes kindness is its own reward. He began to walk again, this time with less purpose, more reverence. He thought of all the ways the forest had shaped him, how it had humbled him and made him listen, how it had shown him that real connection was never about control. The wild, he realized, did not give itself easily. Its lessons were earned in sweat, patience, and the willingness to meet silence with silence. At the edge of the trees, Logan paused one last time. The stars had begun to appear, one by one, fragile as hope. He thought about the lesson he would want to pass on, not just to the next ranger, but to anyone who listened. Kindness in the wild is rarely wasted. Even when it's not returned in the way you expect, it shapes the world in subtle, lasting ways. The smallest gesture, a meal, a safe night, a promise kept, can echo through a life, human or animal. Real connection doesn't require words, only consistent respect and gentle action. He smiled, recalling the bobcat's last look, a gaze that was fierce, free, and somehow grateful. Logan understood now, in a way he never had before, that the greatest gifts the wild offers are fleeting, and that their very impermanence makes them precious. The wilderness wasn't his to keep, but to share in, briefly, on its own terms. As he turned for home, the forest felt larger, yet kinder. Logan's stride was lighter, his heart fuller. The lesson was simple but profound. Patience, humility, and respect were enough. They had to be. Because that's all the wild ever truly offered, to those who stayed long enough and listened hard enough to learn. He walked on, the memory of the bobcat a living ember in his chest. Somewhere ahead, life would go on. New storms, new miracles, new quiet rituals between man and wild. Logan was ready for all of it, content in the knowledge that he had been noticed, trusted, and changed by the silent magic of the woods. If you ever find yourself wandering the edge of the woods at sunrise, you'll know what I mean. There's a hush, a feeling that the world is waiting for you to notice it. The way dew clings to every blade of grass, how the breeze stirs the treetops, how some small creature has left its tracks in the mud. For Logan Carter, the forest had become not just a place of work, but a place of silent wonder. A place that taught him, in its own quiet way, how to listen. Months had passed since the bobcat's last appearance. Life in Deepwood's Preserve rolled on, busy as ever. New fires to watch for, lost hikers to rescue, trees to tag, endless paperwork stacked in neat piles at the ranger station. But something had shifted in Logan. He moved through the world a little slower now, more attentive to the tiny signs and hidden stories in every morning's patrol. It was early autumn, the air crisp and clear, when Logan stood on the porch of the ranger station, a mug of coffee warming his hands, watching the mist lift off the fields. A flock of starlings rose from the grass in a murmuration, wheeling and folding together, as if moved by one shared thought. Logan smiled, remembering the way the bobcat would move, silent, purposeful, always at home in the wild. He'd been invited to speak at the community center that week, not just to new recruits, but to families, hikers, and kids who'd never seen a bobcat outside a picture book. The room was packed with eager faces, city folks and country folks, all hungry for a story that felt real. Logan took a breath, feeling a familiar flutter of nerves, and began. He didn't start with the heroics or the dangers. He started with the stillness, how the wild will test you not just with its storms or its predators, but with its silence. How, if you let yourself slow down, the world will open up in ways you never expected. He told them about that first morning after the storm, about the muddy creek, the eyes that watched him without fear or trust. He spoke of patience, of the rituals and the waiting, of the hard lesson that you can't force respect. You have to earn it. As he spoke, Logan watched his listeners lean in, the room growing quiet, the only sound the occasional squeak of a chair or a child's gasp. He talked about the apples, about the weeks of hope and uncertainty, about the day the bobcat returned and stood her ground. He tried to share what he'd learned, that the greatest rewards often come without fanfare. A single look, a shared silence, a wild animal choosing to trust you for a moment. He told them about the night with the coyotes, about the fear and the sudden, breathtaking appearance of the bobcat by his side. He described how the danger passed, how they'd rested together by the creek, tending wounds and sharing nothing but presence. We never spoke, he told them, smiling. But I understood her, and I like to think she understood me. At the end, Logan looked out over the crowd, feeling the weight of the story settle between them. That bobcat was never mine, he said, voice soft but certain. She wasn't something I could keep or tame or rescue. She was a gift, a reminder that the wild doesn't owe us anything. But sometimes, if we show up with respect and patience, it'll share a miracle with us. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. You don't have to go out looking for bobcats to find magic. Sometimes it's the birds at your feeder, or the fox that crosses your headlights at dawn, or even just the quiet in your own backyard. All you have to do is notice. Slow down. Let yourself wonder. Logan ended his talk by inviting others to share their own stories. If you've ever had a moment with the wild, something that changed you, even a little, I hope you'll tell it. Share it with your kids, your friends, your neighbors, or share it here tonight. Let's spread the quiet magic of nature together. Afterward, people came up to him, one by one. A woman who remembered the song of owls outside her window as a child. A boy who'd watched a snake shed its skin in the garden. A hiker who'd been startled by a deer standing silent in a beam of sunlight. Logan listened, smiled, and nodded, each story weaving a new thread in the growing tapestry of respect for the natural world. Driving home that night, Logan rolled down his window and breathed in the sharp, sweet air of autumn. He let the headlights sweep over the familiar curves of the forest road, eyes searching, just in case he might catch a fleeting glimpse of gold eyes in the dark. He knew the bobcat was out there somewhere, living her wild life, teaching her own quiet lessons to anyone willing to watch and wait. At home, Logan sat on his porch, looking out at the tree line as the stars came out. He thought of all the things he'd learned, about patience, about humility, about letting go of the need to control. The bobcat had taught him that sometimes the best you can do is show up, be kind, and trust that the wild will remember you in its own way. He raised his mug in a silent toast to the woods, to the wild, to the silent trust that had changed him forever. And he hoped that somewhere, someone else was slowing down, looking out at the world with new eyes, ready to notice the quiet miracles all around them.